Hey, it is May 31st. I cannot believe that we're near the end of May, and it has not been a full month yet since Scott passed away, and it feels like forever, and yet it feels like just yesterday. So I'm still stuck there, and what I understand from others is that this is going to be the way it's going to be. Um, and I have some good days and I have some bad days this week. I had probably half of them were reasonable days, and I had a few that were really, really rough. And what does a rough day look like for me? Okay, first of all, I'll tell you what a rough day looks like for me. It means I don't want to get out of bed. Like when I wake up in the morning, I guess my body's sort of relaxed, and it's like now it can like process the emotions, and so I just want to cry. I want to cry because I'm going to get up and I have to face the day alone again. And so yeah, that's hard. So my mornings tend to be hard. It also means that I don't have motivation and I don't have energy. So even when I do feel like, okay, now I can do it, I've got some energy, I can do something, I find that my energy is very short-lived. Like my capacity is super small. So like today, I had a couple of sessions I had to take care of, and normally like that would be like a small part of my day, and then I would be able to power through the rest. I could not. Um, so I just like suddenly just crashed and had to just sit and think and just cool. And I was outside a bit, so I was warm. So I came in, it's cool. I laid on my bed. I tried not to sleep and I didn't sleep because I want to make sure I'm sleeping tonight. But yeah, that's a thing, is that I feel like one or two little things expends all of my energy, and I just get so tired. So I am going to do another activity yet tonight before I go to bed. But it's just amazing how much energy every little thing takes. And today I barbecued, and I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but and my barbecue's just on the deck, so it's not far. But up till now, unless when my family was here, except for that one time, I've been looking at the barbecue going, oh, that is too much work. That's going to take all my energy. And it doesn't take that much energy, but just to sort of show you where I'm at. And so that's kind of one way that grief shows up for me. Another thing is that I forget to eat. So yesterday I went to make myself food. I remembered, oh, I should eat. So I went to make myself food, and for whatever reason, my fan over my stove doesn't work. So all of a sudden my alarm was saying smoke detected, and it wouldn't let me cancel the alarm, and it was getting a little crazy. So I took everything off, and it wasn't fully cooked. So I left it on the counter, and I thought, okay, once all the smoke clears and I can come back, I will eat lunch. But then, or actually that was supposed to be breakfast, but it was lunchtime. And then all of a sudden it was dinner time, and I realized, oh, my steak is still on the counter. I haven't eaten yet. And but then there were other things I had to do, so I didn't get to eat. And then I finally just went through a drive-through, picked up some patties, and I was done. But it's just like it's hard. Every little thing takes motivation. So I am doing my best to coach myself through this. I am giving myself the same coaching suggestions I would give to a client. And so I have a list of things to check off, and I am doing my best to do those things. So that's kind of where that is. I want to say thanks to all of the people that did. After my last video, I said, hey, could you let me know what questions you have or things you want to know about my grief, about the process, about anything at all? And I love that some of you asked questions. And I'm actually really proud of you that are asking hard, brave questions. And so I want to talk about some of those things today. Um, like I actually have like a long list I have in front of me here of what all I could talk about today, but I'm not. It's gonna have to happen in lots of little videos. So one of the things that someone was very brave to ask was, what was it like to have Scott die at home? And that is a really good question, because one of the things that I've realized, I didn't know this before, but that even when people plan to stay at home until they die, most actually don't carry through with that. What I'm finding is that that's a surprising thing, that someone actually keeps that commitment to go all the way through. And one of the reasons that that happens is because things kind of get a little crazy near the end. Like there's lots of medication changes and there's agitation, and maybe the person is in and out of consciousness, and they're not waking up anymore, or they're not, you can't tell if they're awake or asleep, and they're not looking, they're not actually waking up, and they may not be able to swallow anymore. So there's some panic about whether or not they're breathing or swallowing or choking, and there's different sounds that happen as they die. So as an act of care, the palliative care team, like even for me, they were like, okay, well, if this is too hard, we can always take him to the hospital. If this is getting too much, we can take him to the hospital. Would you like us to take him to the hospital? We can always take him to the hospital. And so that out is always there. I tend to be a bit of a, I made my decision, this is our plan, I'm working the plan kind of person. But I can see how people who don't have support, like family support around them, or who maybe don't understand the system or what to expect in the process of death, I can actually see how that would be very hard to stick to your guns and say, no, actually, our plan is for him to die at home. And so I just want to tell you what that's like, because I want to tell you, if I ever had to do it again, I would do it the same way. Now, of course, it would be a different process with a different kind of illness, and perhaps someone who's dying of old age versus dying of brain cancer, those things are going to look different. But the way the care is administered, I think would be similar. So I'll just tell you what it was like. It started off with me calling and saying like, "Hey, things aren't going well." I had a palliative care nurse and doctor, and so I just called and knew who to call. I knew who to call after hours on the weekends. Unfortunately, where I live, there's no on-call hours during the week. However, we transitioned to a new palliative care doctor right near the end who actually agreed to take my calls when there was no on-call nursing available. So I think he's amazing. Like I'll probably thank God for him every day that I live. But usually there's an on-call nurse or a nurse during the day. So I called and I'd say, hey, this is what's happening. And so we don't know what to do with this. For example, when it got too hard to manage sort of the bathroom situation, I'm like, hey, we need to have this taken care of. And, we need a catheter or whatever. At one point, it was like, well, we need some sort of maybe a diaper, or it depends, or a pad or something, because we might not be fast enough to get in there, or if he's in a state where he's not lucid and we might not know. But then we called, and you know what? They were like on the ball immediately. Like within hours, someone was at our door and had what we needed. And they came. At one point they did, so we did get diapering like supplies. We didn't end up using a lot of them just because Scott failed so quickly. But if we had literally everything we needed, from diapers to pull-ups to pads in the bed. And then eventually they did catheterize him, which was for us way, way easier. And so when we got to that point, it was just a phone call. And and they taught me how to use it. So it was like super simple. And I was afraid of that. I was afraid, like, oh no, am I gonna have to change a catheter? No, you don't have to change a catheter. They just teach you, it's super simple how to change the bag. And they teach you there, and they're like, are you comfortable with this? Or do you need the home care to come in and take that away? And I'm like, well, actually, I can do this. It's totally fine. And so they took care of that. When it got to the point where the medications weren't working, I'm like, hey, like, we're on these kind of medications, and he's having trouble swallowing. And as those of you who saw his last videos noticed that half his face was paralyzed, and he was having a lot of trouble. He couldn't move food from one side of his mouth to the other. He couldn't suck on a straw, and eventually that paralysis moved over and over, and he couldn't he couldn't open his mouth very well, and he couldn't swallow. And so like at the beginning he could, or I should say the beginning, at one point he could still like swallow a noodle, like a Kraft dinner noodle at a time. I think he had like 4 one day, which was the most he ate in about 4 days. But like that was hard for him. So swallowing pills was next to impossible. Naturally, they can't give IV at home. You have to be in the hospital for IV. So at that point, I'm like, ooh, what can we do? Because if we can't have IV at home, and they're like, don't worry, we can do what's called subcuts. So what a subcut is short for subcutaneous. That means just under the skin. So it's not going into a blood vein. It's going into the top layer of the skin. So it's just sort of going into the fleshy part. And they gave him subcuts on two on each thigh. So what happened with that is it was again super simple. They came and they filled the syringes for me. So I didn't have to do that. They asked me if I wanted to, and some of them I did do on my own, but they're like, you know what, if you're not comfortable, we'll do it for you. And most of the time they did it for me because A, I was tired, B, I'm like, you know what, you're here, just do it. And so I had them fill the syringes with the right dose of medication. We put a chart up on the wall for what time everything had to happen. And that was really smart on the sake for the sake of my daughter did that for me because I was so tired and I'm like, oh, I think I took it at, and I'd write it down on a scrap piece of paper and then I'd realize, oh, where's that scrap piece of paper? Oh shoot, someone threw that out. So or we couldn't find it. So we finally, my daughter who's a healthcare aide, she does home care, she stuck it on just like taped it onto the wall. I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Because I was tired. So we taped it onto the wall and then it was just super simple. At this time, this medication, this time, that medication, this time we needs to be turned, this time check the catheter. And it just made it like super straightforward. And in between we could rest. And so, and by rest, I rested and others rested, but I couldn't sleep because there were still things that I wanted to do. I was paying attention to whether or not he was waking up. Because if he did wake up, we wanted to be there to speak to him, to hear what he had to say, to encourage him, to love him, to make sure that he was comfortable. So in those moments, we wanted to be there. So yeah, the palliative care team like showed me how to do all that, and it's super easy. I was expecting it to be like really hard, and it's not. And like really anybody could do it. At one point, my 4-year-old granddaughter was in the room while I was giving him a shot of one thing, and so I did screw it on for her, and I'm like, you know, Saba needs some medicine. Would you like to push it? And very gently she pushed it in. It was like not hard. So I mean, granted, I wouldn't leave her in charge of that, but it's really not a hard process. So so the palliative care team was there for us for all that. And at one time when things were getting a little bit crazy and you know, we had so many decisions to make, right? Because he could not speak to us anymore about like where his pain was, if he was having pain. We could only assess whether or not he was in pain based on his groaning, his moaning, his facial expressions, whether when we touched a part of his body, if he grimaced or if it gave relief. So we were basing it on that. There was only one time where he did talk about pain, and it was in his leg. And so I was asking the wrong questions for a long time. I was saying, do you have a headache? Do you have head pain? Do your ears hurt? Do your eyes hurt? Where's the pain? He couldn't answer where's the pain. But whenever I asked, does your head hurt? Does your ears hurt? Do your eyes hurt? Do you have a headache? He'd always say no. What I should have said, do you have pain anywhere? I missed that question. And now I know better. So for the next time I would say, do you have pain anywhere? And he would have been able to say yes, because it was in his leg. We did figure that out because there was a short moment where he was so full of pain that he actually was able to speak out, my leg. And they were like, oh my goodness, he has leg pain. And then once we figured out that, we got some pain medication into him and we realized, oh, now he's completely relaxed. That made a big difference. When he couldn't swallow anymore, we had to change the medication from a swallowing to a subcut injection. And we were able to help with that. His pain was not excessive towards the end. So he wasn't sedated a lot, actually. He was sleeping all the time, but he wasn't really sedated. He was on anti-seizure medication, which is sedating. So the one they switched him to, I believe they switched it to him on Thursday, but the doctor told me it takes 3 to 4 days for that to like fully take effect. So he ended up having some seizures, which, you know, if I hadn't been aware that they were going to happen, I might have been freaked out. But thankfully they warned me, and I would say like, just be prepared for some of these things. So we had a cloth, we were able to wipe all the stuff away from his mouth, clean him out. And he just continued. I mean, he had these seizures while he was unconscious or sleeping, whatever you'd want to say. And so they didn't even seem that they bothered him that much. I mean, we could see that they were happening, That particular phenobarbital can cause sedation, but it didn't seem to make any difference from before we started it till after. And he wasn't even on it for the full 4 days that they had said it would take effect before he passed away. So some of them do give medications because the pain medications might cause sedation. We had a really, really good doctor who helped me decide whether or not, like, this is what this medication should do, but it's not doing that anymore. So, for example, this medication should reduce symptoms and he should begin to get more alert. He should be able to eat. He should be able to stop vomiting, all these things. That medication's not doing that. So now we need to decide, do we keep that medication or do we stop the medication? And one of the side effects of that medication, which is a form of steroid, it was making him very agitated. And so he could never be completely peaceful. He was sort of never like relaxing. And that's why we were taking care of him like every 30, 60, 90 seconds. He needed some attention. And so we made that decision. I made the decision in conversation together with the kids to stop that medication so that he could relax. And knowing that that may, I mean, you can never tell for sure, may, um, shorten the time till when he died. But at this point, the doctor was very good at saying, you're either prolonging living, which is not necessarily life, you're just prolonging living, like where he might have vital signs, but he's not actually like engaged in life. He's not talking anymore. He's not waking up anymore. He's not sitting up on his own anymore. You can prolong this living, but by doing so, you're also prolonging the dying and the suffering. So we had to make a decision, and that was a difficult decision to make. But Scott and I had actually had that conversation ahead of time in our preparation, in our talking through what might this look like at the end of life. And Scott said, I'm ready to go. Don't make me suffer longer than I have to. And when you think it's time, just do what you need to do, because I know I'm going to see Jesus. And so with complete confidence, I could make those decisions. And I had the support of the palliative care team. I had the support of his kids. It really wasn't such a hard decision in the end. I mean, it was hard. Trust me, it was hard. But I could see where this was going, and I did not want to prolong the suffering. And I think that's one benefit of having him at home, is that we could see how hard this was, and everybody could see how hard this was for Scott. With the agitation and his body functions just dropping so quickly, not being able to sit, not being able to hold, not being able to do a lot of things, not opening his eyes anymore, not swallowing. So we could see this was hard, and we could see his body was wasting away. So why would we prolong this any further? In the hospital, if you're currently right now, today in May 2023, had he been in the hospital, only one person would have been able to be there. They still have all those COVID rules happening. And so that means there would have been me. I would have been there alone. I would have been making those decisions alone. And honestly, the sort of mandate of hospitals is to keep life going. And unless you're in a palliative care situation, which he would have been even under the care of a doctor, but in the hospital, different doctors come in and out, and you don't necessarily have that same consistency of someone saying, this is what's happening to his body, and explaining it to you and saying, he is going to die. He can either die like soon, or you can prolong this suffering for another week or two, maybe. But he's going to die within the next week or so. So how long do you want this to go? So in the hospital, I would have been alone. It would not have been the whole family there, hugging him, loving him, saying the words that need to be said, seeing the struggle, and agreeing that he's ready to go. We want him to see Jesus sooner rather than later. So that was, that's another reason why I loved having him at home. I wasn't alone. And, whether it's friends, we had our pastor come in. We were able to call on people who could support us, who could come, hold our hands. My mom and dad were there throughout the week, not just all at one time, but like my kids came throughout the week. My grandchildren came throughout the week, and I want to, do another video on the grandchildren. That's another thing that someone said to me. Did you let the grandchildren see him before he died? Absolutely. But I'll talk about that another day. Another thing about the palliative care thing and dying at home is that that's what the palliative care team is there for. And I have to say that the nurse we had on those final like 2 or 3 days when he was passing away, so from Friday afternoon right through till he passed away, and even the next day I got a call. She said to me, I don't care how many times you call. This is my job and this is what I'm here for. So call me as many times as you need, because they're like, has any modeling started? Modeling is when the blood starts to pool, the circulation is stopping, and so blood starts to pool, and the skin looks different, especially on the bottom where gravity pools the blood. And I'm like, I don't know what it looks like. Could it be this? Could it be that? And so I was calling, and then at one point when there was another symptom that had showed up, and I'm like, what do I do here? I think I called her like 3 times in 10 minutes, and she said, just keep calling. This is okay. This is good. And then, I called a little bit later about this, and I called another hour later about that. And every time I cried and I said, I think he's getting closer. I think we're losing him. And she's like, yeah, it sounds that way. How are you doing? Are you okay? Are you good with him at home? Do you want us to take him into the hospital? I'm like, no, we're good. We're good here. It's hard, but it's good. And so as there's a death rattle that starts, I was so petrified of that death rattle, because just the word death rattle sounds terrible. But when you begin to understand what that is, and the sound of it, it's like a bubbly breathing. And when you understand that it's not drowning and it's not happening in his lungs, it's just literally in the back of his throat, air popping through the bubbles. Like if you would blow bubbles in your drink, that sound, it's a little bit about what that sounds like, because air is coming through. If air wasn't coming through, that would be more like the drowning part, but this air is coming through, so it's bubbling, so there's air. So that rattle, I wasn't sure what to expect, but when it did start, I was able to like turn the phone on speaker and say, is this what you were talking about? And she's like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And so, I had the support all the way through. Another really nice thing about having the patient at home, so my husband at home, so whoever your loved one is that's passing away, having them at home, is that in between you can rest. So it's a process. It's a marathon. Like you have to go, go, go. And I have my comfortable chair. I could put my comfortable clothes on. I could lay in the bed beside him. I laid in the bed and held him, and he held me literally almost all week. He was much calmer if he could feel me, and because he wasn't opening his eyes anymore, he could feel that I was close by. I was holding his hand or stroking his head or his arm or his back, and that it just was much more restful for me. You can't just crawl into a hospital bed in the hospital room, and those chairs are awfully uncomfortable. And if you're doing this for a week, it's hard on you, it's hard on the body, and no one else can share that burden with you. And if you do go home to rest, there's always that fear. Is he gonna die when I'm gone? And so it gives everyone else the ability to eat when you need, because the fridge is right there. And what I found is the church and people and neighbors were just so amazing, bringing us snacks, bringing us drink, bringing us a big container of Tim Hortons coffee, whatever it was. There was food and snacks here for all the people that were here as they came and went. So that meant that I didn't have to worry about it. And sometimes people who were here would order things. And that meant that no one was ever having to leave him alone. And we have just been through this whole big COVID thing, and dying alone should never happen. It should never happen. Like, unless there's an extreme circumstance, we are made to be relational creatures from the moment we're born until or moment we're conceived. Like, we're carried in our mother's womb, and we're meant to be in relationship all the way through to the end. And the worst form of torture really is like being completely isolated from other people. So this should especially not happen at the end of life. Scott and I talked about this because his experience was that death during COVID was not kind to his family during COVID when his first wife passed away. And we did not want that for him. So we made sure that we knew that what we wanted was for his family to be here. And so from the first moment that Scott said, I want Serena and Stuart to come here, I called them. They came. They did take a break and go back for a bit when he started to settle a little bit, once the medication was under control. But in less than 24 hours, we called them back. And so they were actually able to be here to see their dad. And when he did have lucid moments, I would call them into the room, and whoever was here, and we'd say the things that need to be said. We played songs for him. I can't tell you how many times I played Grave Robber for him in the last few days, or the last week, I guess I should say. And we gathered around, we sang for him. I was often just praying for him. Like, isn't that what we want? To have that peaceful time with family? In the end, that's what's most important. And so we wanted to sort of, Scott and I ahead of time wanted to make this time a place where one moment he's talking to Jesus here, and the next moment he's talking to Jesus there. He's in my arms one moment, in the arms of Jesus the next. And that was our goal, and we were able to do that. And I think that helped with a lot of the peacefulness of that last week. There was no like big anxiety. There was no thrashing about. There was no screaming and death and agony. None of that. Like, it wasn't like the movies. And I've seen some pretty horrible things, and I've heard some pretty horrible things. But I have to say that I also know that Scott had a personal relationship with Jesus. And we knew that he was walking from one life into another life. His life was continuing. His body was dying. He had the confidence and assurance of his salvation. He knew where he was going. There was no doubt, 100% assurance. And so it could be a peaceful death, quiet at home. And like, that's beautiful. And so I want to say to you, like, if you are not sure about your salvation, I would love to have that conversation with you, because it is 100% possible to know for sure where you are going when you die, whether that's in a tragic, quick, you die in a car accident, or it's a long drawn out illness. You can know for sure. And that makes such a difference on your heart, on the people around you, and then on that process of dying, because you have something to look forward to. Death is only a door into real life. This is just kind of a shadow, a mirror of the way better things to come. So I'm pretty sure that changed the perspective for us on Scott's passing, because he was completely peaceful as he died. So as things got further and further, and I would call the nurse and I'd say, so there's lots of modeling, the death rattle has begun, and they would just walk me through. And I was so glad the nurse who came to the house, she came twice that day. She came twice lots a day when I think she wasn't supposed to, but one time she even came after hours, because she cared about the situation, and she cared about us as people, not just about as patients. And she said to us, you should be turning him every 2 hours. So, okay, how do we do that? So we learned how to turn him. And my daughter was here for part of that. And she's, like I said, she's a healthcare aide. She showed us how. But the nurse did tell us, and my daughter was like, sat me down. She crouched down in front of me, eye to eye. Mom, I just want you to know that often when we turn patients, that's when they die. And I want you to know ahead of time, and the nurse told me this too, this is not your fault. You are not killing him when you turn him, but likely he was just at the last, and then that last effort of turning just puts that last breath out of their system. And so it's just what commonly happens when you turn them. This did not happen in Scott's case. We turned him, and then a very short while later, his breathing got super shallow. It went from, it wasn't this line, it sounded like gurgling, but I can't gurgle. I don't have mucus in my throat. But it sounded like this really gurgling, bubbly breathing that was kind of loud, like loud. That hurts my throat. Do very shallow. And that's when I called the kids in, and I said, his breathing has changed. I think he's going. I think he's going to go soon. We don't have long. So we all gathered around. We said our goodbyes again. And then all of a sudden, with everyone and all the people that were in the room, there was one, that was it. And then I was like, okay, I think he's done. I think that was his last breath. We waited and waited. All of a sudden, there was one more. And I counted past 60, past 120. And then I began to cry because that's when I realized that actually was the last breath. Yeah, I was able to kiss him. I was able to hold him a little longer. There was no beeping sounds throughout the day. Nobody coming to check his blood pressure. Nobody coming to like do all the tests in his temperature. None of that. It was quiet. It was peaceful. No beeping, no buzzing in the halls, no neighbor patient doing their thing. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was beautiful to be here at home together. Nobody telling us, excuse me, but there's only two people allowed in the room or one person allowed in the room. I'm sorry, you've exceeded your hours. I'm sorry, visiting hours are over. You need to go home now. Can come back at 8 a.m. tomorrow. None of that. It was all just us, family, here, quiet, peacefully. And so, like, if I say that it was beautiful, it was beautiful. That's if I go, that's how I want to go. I saw something beautiful happen there. He literally just moved from this life to the next, and it was a simple transition. And so we waited for him after I had cried a few big cries, loud cries and tears and lots of mess. Um, I let others come in who wanted to see him, including some of my grandchildren. And I have to say it's exactly what my granddaughter said. She looked at him and she said, "Sabbath's not there." That's exactly what happened. It's just like he's gone. Something changes. There's no life left. His skin doesn't feel right. The like nothing looks like him anymore. It's his body. It's just empty. And I hadn't eaten very much that day. Someone did drop some food into my mouth at some point and give me a sip of water. But I had literally been in bed with Scott, holding him and just being with him through this journey. And I hadn't eaten well in the last couple days. Although food was there, I just didn't. The stress and the fatigue and just all of that. I didn't have hunger really, or thirst. I didn't drink nearly enough either. But once it was over, I just like got up and sat up on the edge of the bed, and suddenly I just got that passage in scripture where after David has finished, he's been praying and fasting for his son to live, and he didn't live. I mean, you're right, he didn't live, he died. Then what happened is, um, like someone said to him, like, so now why are you up and eating? Why are you feasting and eating now that your child has died, but you were not eating while he was alive? And he said, then there was hope and I could pray for him. But now he has already gone. And so now I will celebrate that. Sorry about the hiccups, that I will see him again in heaven. That was a paraphrase, by the way. That was not a quotation. So that's exactly how I felt, though. It's like, okay, my vigil is done. I've done what I purposed in my heart to do, what Scott and I had decided this would look like, and what I feel like the Lord called me to do when caring for my husband in these last days. And suddenly, for the first time in a week, I felt hungry and very thirsty. And I had to use the bathroom. And I was like, all of a sudden, I could feel my body going, okay, this is done. So I got up and I walked away. I went to the kitchen. I sat on the couch. I cried. People brought me food. I ate. I drank. I did go back. Of course, I had to call the funeral home. So when you are palliative and there's someone in your family who is going to be dying and it's likely that they'll die at home, or that is what you've told them your choices. So they'll ask you, are you going to do palliative care at home, or are you going to even end up in the hospital? Our goal was that he would die at home. So you get what's called a notice of anticipated death at home. So I did not have to call 911. I did not have to call the police. Whenever I was ready, I could call the funeral home. So that's what I did. I waited about an hour. I think it was about an hour, maybe an hour and a bit. And after everyone had had their chance to see Scott, be with him if they wanted to be, and then I called the funeral home. They told me what time to expect their arrival. They asked a few detailed questions about how it would be to get into the home with a stretcher. And so we were able to communicate that. How many corners? What's it going to be like? Is there room in the bedroom for the stretcher? So they asked a bunch of questions, and then the rest they just evaluated when they came. When they arrived, the funeral director came into the home. There's two of them together, of course. They came into the home. They gave us our condolences. Thankfully, the funeral director that we chose is a believer, and he was able to pray. And he met everyone in the family. And then he just sort of looked, and logistically, we'll need to put the stretcher here, we'll need to do this, and we'll need to that. And then he said to us, okay, we're going to have to ask you to leave. So if you can all go to the other room, and then please don't come back in until after we have exited the room. We will put him in a body bag and we'll bring him out on the stretcher. And those that want to can see him one more time before we take him out and put him in the hearse. And I was like, okay. So we all hung out in the room. They did their thing. And I did go back in one more time alone just to give him a kiss, but he wasn't there. I could feel it. He was getting cold. He was getting stiff and cold. There was no response. If you know Scott at all, if he would have seen me coming for a kiss, he would have like turned around and he would have kissed me. And so at one point, someone asked me, "Do you have proof that he's dead?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I went to kiss him and he did not. He did not respond. So definitely proof of death. It's a bit of a joke, but honestly, there was nothing there. He wasn't there. And at that point, I was just, the only thing that shocked me about that is as I moved him on the bed, just because I was getting closer to where I could kiss his head, I moved it a little bit, and so there was some air that probably was stuck in his lungs, and as it shifted, some air came out. It wasn't like a breath or anything, but I can see how if you weren't anticipating that, it might go, "Oh, is he breathing?" But what shocked me was the smell, and I was like, wow, how quickly he is decomposing. No wonder they bring him quickly, and they tell you to call quickly to get them to the funeral home. So yeah, I could smell the decomposition starting on him already, and it had only been like 2 hours. So that was shocking to me. But anyway, the funeral home came, they put him in a body bag. They actually cleaned up our room. They made my bed and they wheeled him down the hall. He was zipped up until his chin. And and he had his catheter in, he had his subcutaneous, like those subcuts were still in, the lines were still in. Everything, like, he clearly wasn't dressed properly, but we didn't see any of that. They put him in the bag, they took care of all that. Everything was just so decently and dignified and like decently done. It was just beautiful. And so we all could see him. They just had his head showing, and those who wanted to could say goodbye one more time. And everyone said, yeah, that's not Scott anymore. They took him out of the home and he was gone. And then we had like some time, because of course the funeral home doesn't open until Monday, so it wasn't until Monday that we began making other arrangements. But so the process of death was very, very different at home than it is in the hospital. Many people, it's often, what I've heard from people is right now, if someone is dying in the dying process, they only allow one person in there. And it's only once they're like, okay, we might have like minutes left that, this person's unconscious, they're never going to wake again. Now they allow you to bring people in, but it's usually too late. And it's usually one or two people, like that's it. If you have a family like mine, there's 6 children, there's 3 in-laws, there's 6 grandchildren. I have a mother and a father, and then there's me, right? So there's lots of people involved in a family of a loved one. And so it's just so much more relational to be able to be at home. And then the other thing in the hospital, I've heard 2 different kinds of scenarios, one where they wheel the bed out and one where the funeral director will come and transfer them, and then they're wheeled out that way, or you're asked to leave. So it's just not the same kind of peaceful, dignified goodbye that I felt we had here at home. And so if anyone is scared of a palliative care experience at home and dying at home, I want to tell you, it doesn't have to be scary. It was actually super beautiful, super peaceful. I would do it again in a heartbeat. It sounds so crazy. I don't want anyone to die, okay? So no one dying on me. But I'd much rather this than in the hospital where it's more sterile. I mean, even when he was in the hospital after the last few surgeries he had, and he's had five in the last year, um, there's all the beeping, the noise, the like even if your room is quiet, all the hall noises, it's just like so much stuff and code reds and code whites and code alarms, whatever. La, 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 la. There's all these things, and it just makes the nights even so stressful. And we had none of that. We had none of that. And you know, in the process of dealing with the palliative care people who were so gracious at saying just call whenever, call whenever, call whenever, call as many times as you need, I felt very cared for in the process. Once it was all said and done, I got a call. Are you okay? How are you doing? Do you need anything? Have you done this? Have you done that? Okay, we're going to call you again tomorrow. And I felt like they cared for us. Another thing that the doctor did at home that may have been different. Now, it's probably going to depend on your doctor, but that may have been different in the hospital because there's different doctors, different nurses that all have different philosophies of dying. But the philosophy that Scott and I held to was we are going to preserve living as long as there is life. Quality of life is what mattered to us. And as long as that quality of life was available, we would continue to pursue the living. But as soon as that wasn't, we were not going to play God and like keep pushing, keeping him alive just for the sake of having breath. Because a lot, like let's just say like 100 years ago, a lot of these processes wouldn't have been available. He would have been dead a long, long time ago. So we're going to allow God to make that decision. And so for us, that meant we were not going to prolong the dying. So we had that. Our philosophy of life was, let's not prolong dying. Let's stop living when life is done, kind of thing. If that makes sense. If that's complicated, let me know. I'll try and clarify better. And we ended up with a doctor. Our final doctor during our palliative care time was actually in line with that philosophy. But he also saw us as people together in the home, and a death at home is different. So he changed how we did. Instead of doing the pain medication where it was consistently in his system, what they did is they allowed us to give a higher dose, and then not give any for a long time. Now, why was that important for us in the dying time? Let me explain. When you are constantly giving sort of a lower or like a maintenance dose of pain medication, there is a level of sedation that does happen. Like just think about taking a Gravol. You're a lot more groggy. You can't sort of wake up to say your piece. You might not make as much sense. So that's what would happen sort of on maintenance level of like hydromorphone, right? You just want to keep that pain level like taken care of. You're not like super sedated, but it's always there. So we had been doing some of that. We weren't constant. We were just doing it when he needed it. So we were doing it on an as needed basis. But then towards the end, the doctor said to us, let's change how we're doing this. Let's give him one high dose and then just let it taper off. Because near the end of life, they actually stop feeling pain. And so what happens then is when they stop feeling pain and they're not sedated, they may actually have the opportunity to wake up a little bit more and actually say things, be lucid. You might be able to communicate one more time. Now, in Scott's case, he didn't. He didn't wake up again and he did not speak again. He did grunt a little bit. There was some moans and grunting in response to some things that we said, but he did not speak or open his eyes or give any, he didn't initiate any sort of conversation or anything after that point. But what I loved about the palliative care team was that they were looking at us as people in relationship with Scott and saying, you know what, let's make this possible to, like, we're going to manage his pain now while he's having it, and then we're going to let it taper off. Because if he's dying, we might get to that place where he doesn't have pain, and he might wake up enough so that you guys can get one more chance to talk to him, to speak with him, for him to maybe wake up enough to initiate conversation. And I just thought that was so kind and caring and comforting to know that our palliative care team was like looking for that for us. And I just felt that was beautiful. You may or may not get that in the hospital. And you certainly wouldn't get it with 10 people around his bed, because that's not allowed anymore. So anyway, that's my story of palliative care and dying at home. It was, I had like, there's more I could tell you. I could tell you about what kinds of questions to ask and things to be prepared for, but that's a little bit much. It's probably more suited to a specific situation. But so if you do have a loved one who is palliative, send me questions. Maybe we can have this conversation. If enough people are having the conversation, I might make a video, but dying at home does not need to be scary. And it's actually very beautiful. And it makes me feel like I have no regrets about how this week went, about how he died, about my part in it. And I feel like I was able to be the wife I needed to be, even though I was exhausted. Like, it was exhausting. But I was able to do it because of the support of my family, the fact that Scott had a vibrant relationship with Jesus before any of this started. So I knew where he was going. He knew he was going. It was peaceful. It was beautiful. It was all done in relationship. And someone said I smothered him with love. That's hard to take because I didn't know what you meant by that. But what I know is that Scott was loved and surrounded by those that loved him, and he knew it right till the very end. So that's what dying at home was like for us. May not be what it's like for everyone else, but I think that there are things you can do to set it up in advance so that it can be this way. And if you have a good palliative care team, and it seems like they were amazing, like they will help you through this. Like, I was so happy with it. So anyway, there you go. That was my story. Would I do it again? Yes, absolutely. I have pictures of that my daughters, actually both of them, and I think even maybe some, I don't even know who all, but they took pictures of us often in those last days of me lying with him, sometimes in the middle of the night or whenever he would begin to speak. So someone was taking video of it. My daughter usually was taking video. It's very quiet. But we have all of those special moments. I have those special moments. Hearing what he was telling me, calling me a princess, telling me I'd helped him have a great day. He was dying, but I'd held him all day, and he said, "Thanks for making this a great day." Yeah. Those private moments would not have been captured if I were in the hospital, because she wouldn't have been able to be there. But I have them now, and I'd say, like, I have lots of things I'd like to tell you. If you are doing this palliative care journey, I have things I'd love to tell you about how to be prepared, things you can do that help you through the journey. But I don't want to bore you. It's already been a super long video. So anyway, thanks, guys. If you have more questions, you know what to do. Post them, send them to me, DM me, text me, whatever we need to do. I would love to hear the questions, because it's helping me work through the grief and just talk about it, just to talk about it. So feels good for me. So thanks, guys, for the opportunity. I love you all.